Hi, my name is Christina Misas.
Hi, I'm Jensen Diaz.
Hi, I'm A. Sanchez.
Hi, I'm Melissa Delgado.
Hi, my name is Monica Corona.
And we got the topic, well, the essay named Can This Marriage Be Saved by Karina Chocano. And we're going to just discuss this for a little bit. So what I got out of this chapter was pretty much what traditional marriage used to look like and how it has completely changed over time. Yet there's some aspects of marriage that continue to stay the same, and that mostly has to do with, like, obviously the mother staying at home taking care of the kids while the fathers are at work, making the money.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's pretty much what I was like hearing, or at least what I was reading throughout the essay. And it was also showing how they were showing traditional marriage and how it was perceived back then, and how it looked in films, and how it was even more like traditional and more towards like, oh, women being housewives and men being businessmen in movies, and it was more like black and white there than it was anywhere else, especially like in films and sitcoms.
Yeah, she also kind of gives her own like personal perspective. So it's like she gives a story of like her own parents and how their marriage is, and then she also gives a perspective of how her parents' marriage is different than her grandparents' marriage, and how sort of like it has become a little bit more modern, where her grandparents like completely it was just the man works and the woman stays at home, and her own parents kind of shifted a little bit, so it's not as like men in their roles and women in their roles.
Also, I would want to say that one thing that she did say, that some of the standards that were held back then are still held now. I feel like now in marriages, there is some slight of a change, but for the most part, I feel like women are just labeled to stay home and not work as like how men would work. And I feel like now over the years, I feel like it should be changing. But I took that from the book.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Just kind of how it needs to change. Like, what do you think like are ways that like it should be? Like, what specifically would you say?
Oh, some things that should change.
Yeah.
I feel like just the idea of how like women can't do work, like how men can. Like we've seen in the book, I feel like just women are just supposed to be at home. Or especially in the part where the yellow wallpaper, the women after giving birth, they go through postpartum depression. But with that, she was taken to a house in the country where she was just taken from her baby. She wasn't allowed to interact with her husband. And I feel like a lot of times women are just like, they were just, how do I explain it? They're just taken away from what they should be doing just to be in the labeled as, oh, a housewife. I don't
Yeah.
know if that makes sense.
No, it makes sense. I think what needs to change is more like the concept. I mean, we see it like there are women and men working now, so it's very different than it was before. There are a lot of more women in the workforce than it was before. There's women in careers that were set basically for men, but I think what needs to change is everyone's idea that, oh, women are supposed to stay home and provide for the home, whereas they're taking care of the home, taking care of the kids, and that should be their main priority. And whereas the man's job is just his main priority is just making sure that he's making enough money to provide for the home and the family. So I
Yeah, I
think
also
that idea needs to change. Sorry.
yeah, I also think because she also mentions like media, like movies and shows and stuff. I think also that could be changed too, where they could incorporate also like women being a little bit more out there, like instead of just at home and the husband doing everything. Because a lot of people obviously watch movies and TV shows, and by seeing that, it also causes a change in them.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like in movies especially, they should portray women taking charge instead of just being like under the man's wing.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that brings up the point when the book where it talks about how in a lot of movies, the women's goal is to get married at the end, you know, and that's the happy story for them at the end. But in reality, that's not real, you know what I mean? But that's important.
Yeah.
Should we start this presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
So through this book, the chapter begins like with her opening up, talking about her and her family moving from New York to New Jersey, and to a town a lot like Stepford, where just the quietness. And I actually decided to watch the movie just to see what it was about, and all I gotta say is it's really creepy. Really creepy.
It is.
Really creepy. And so Joanna's like the main character of this, right? Her and her family moved to Stepford, where she notices that these women are submissive to their husband, and they're like, you know, like doing everything they say. They look, you know, like perfect wives, you know, and in all reality they're robots at the end of the movie. Like you find out that these women are robots, and that half of these women were killed just to be there for their husbands. So one of the quotes that I got from the book was, Stepford wives are singularly devoted to their bodies, homes, husbands, and children. They're domestically and cult-like in its self-abnegation. The wives exist only to nurture, please, and display their husband's status. They go to the supermarket in full makeup. They decline invitations for coffee and stay home to wax the floor. It's true. It's like really weird in that movie. It's I don't know. You guys have to watch that. But actually, the Stepford wife is actually a woman who, in conservative Christian norms, from what I searched up, it's deferring to our men and letting them make all the decisions that affect us and our household. I don't agree with this. I don't think that women should degrade themselves for their husband. That's just not okay. Or be submissive. You know what I mean? I don't agree with that at all. And this is a really quick clip from the movie.
Of course, I did look terrific.
Bobby, you're not at the plaza now. I mean, so why are you wearing all that makeup? I mean, you never even used to clean your kitchen, much less wear makeup.
Admit it, Joanna. I was a joke. Dave works hard all day long, and what does he come home to? A slob.
Bobby, it's gotten to you now.
Nothing's got me. I just want to look like a woman and keep my house looking decent, too.
You're just like Charmaine.
Will you?
So yeah, that was a clip. So throughout the book, they also talk about the feminine mystique and the women's movement, the ERA. They talk a lot about Betty Friedan. I'm sorry, I don't know how to say her name, but so the feminine mystique is actually is remembered as the book that started the second wave of the women's movement. And the feminine mystique is a false notion that women's role in society is to be a wife, mother, and a housewife, nothing else. And what she does in this book is to, she pretty much drew the attention of the massive unhappiness that many women felt in that time period, and that how media idolized the happy suburban wife image, which obviously was it back then. And a little quote from the book was actually, women who adjust as housewives, who grow up wanting to be just a housewife, are in as much danger as the millions who walk their own death into the concentration camps. They are suffering a slow death of mind and spirit. A lot of people didn't agree with that during this time period, especially the ones who were against the ERA movement. And that was one of the main conservative Christians was Phyllis Schlafly. She was definitely against that. And there's actually a show called Miss America that I have a quick film, a little short clip of that in this presentation. But yeah, this Betty Friedan really definitely showed, like, you know, the unhappiness of women during this time.
You want me to play the video?
I think we're gonna go to the Betty. We're gonna talk a little bit more about Betty.
Yeah, so just to kind of add on to Betty Friedan and what she did, she was a very well-known feminist writer and activist in the 1960s as well as the 70s. She was author of obviously The Feminine Mystique, as well as The Second Stage, The Fountain of Age, and a few others. And just to kind of add on to what she kind of accomplished in her career, she started like a national organization for women in 1966 just to support the ratification of just kind of giving women their rights and just kind of supporting like that change that needed to happen in our country. To add on to that, 4 years later, she was a part of the Women's Strike for Equality, in which she just served as an activist using her platform that she created through her writing as just another way to influence that perspective, which is talked about in the next bullet as well. She was very involved in the perspective on lesbian politics, abortion, pornography, and a lot of stuff just kind of that dealt with the like negative perception of just women and kind of like degrading them for doing what they choose to do. And then in the next slide, we have that video that Christina was talking about. And it's just in the show Miss America, where in this, Phyllis Schlafly, which is one of the main characters, is just explaining how the women in that era kind of lived, and she's just kind of supporting not to ratify that bill.
But don't take my word for it. Read their own literature. Betty Friedan, mother of the movement, wrote in The Feminine Mystique that marriage is, and I quote, a comfortable concentration camp. But it is not enough that they're demeaning us in the press. Oh no. Now they want to use our miraculous Constitution to create a sex-neutral society through this so-called Equal Rights Amendment.
So also one of the tips, Kate Millett kicked off modern feminist literacy criticism with sexual politics. This was considered to be a central text of the second wave feminism. She also stated that the relationship between the sexes was a master-slave relationship. Millett demonstrated how male-dominated culture has produced literary works that are in fact degrading to women and hurtful to the concept of alleviating the conditions of women's lives. In it, she dissected the work of D.H. Lawrence, Norman Mailer, and Henry Miller for writing about women in a sexist way. Millett questioned the origins of patriarchy and argued that sex-based oppression was both political and cultural. Some background information was that she was born on September 14th, 1934. She died on September 6th, 2017 at the age of 82. Influential figure in the women's liberation movement. She became a driving force in the second wave, which transformed the movement in the 1960s and 1970s. She had a husband named Fumio Yoshimura, but got divorced when she came out as lesbian. After coming out and her divorce, she's in 1892 by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. It illustrated the mental and physical health of women in the 19th century. It's basically a story of a woman who suffered from a temporary nervous depression after the birth of her baby, which she is then taken to a house in the country by her husband, John, for a rescue. In the room she was assigned, all of the walls were covered in yellow wallpaper, which unsettled her, and therefore she kept a secret journal in which she recorded her growing fixation of the wallpaper, and slowly becomes convinced that there's a woman trapped behind it, which later believes it's herself. The idea behind a rescuer in that era was to break the patient's will and teach her to submit to male authority for the good of her health by isolating her from her baby and activities. This all came from the experience of Gilman's postpartum depression. That is why she wrote it. Some commentary that I had was that it showed the magnitude of women have to go through even after birth, both emotionally and physically, and also mentally. It is an example that throughout the different eras, women are still subject to staying at home and being responsible for maintaining their family. The symbolism behind her, now she was convinced that there was a woman behind it, which was also herself, trapped inside of it, depicted the struggles of women that and what they have to go through mentally and physically, as well as emotionally with their health. And it shows that women are oftentimes trapped into a lifestyle that was already written for them, which leads to the feeling of despair and depression for most women dealing with such factors.
So in her essay, Karina Chicano mentioned two TV shows called Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie. Both of those films came out in the 1960s until the 1970s, are not films, but sitcoms pretty much. And both main characters, are the main leads of those films, were female, which was a little bit different. And I mean, it's kind of the point, but at the same time, those females both had their own gifts or their own powerful things. Like Samantha in Bewitched was a witch who had powers at the twinkle of a nose, and then Jeannie had her crossing her arms and the nodding of a head that just made wishes and commands happen. But though both women were very powerful and could pretty much do anything on their own, they both subdued themselves to the life of a man. And if you look at it, it shows the, or at least the sitcoms in both of them, because both of them were powerful women, not necessarily like, I guess, in the eyes of a man, but in powerful women in general, just because of their gifts. They put their own husbands' jobs, or at least the man of their interest in the case of Jeannie, they put their jobs and their pretty much reputations at stake almost every single time they did anything. And I guess that says a lot about the times that they were recording or producing these sitcoms or shows, because it just showed that yes, women, though they have these powers and things like that, they still have to be under a man, and they don't have anything for their own. They're still under a man, and they're still living under their thumb, and they still have to actually, I guess, put themselves down, not put themselves down in like a negative way, but they have to like calm themselves down or act a certain way in order to be part of these men's lives in a way that they want to be. And I think it's actually kind of ironic, which is something I was thinking about, was that Samantha's a witch and Jeannie's obviously a genie, but these aspects of women seen back some time ago when the witch trials were happening, if women were thought of being a witch or anything like that, they were taken to a stake and burned at the stake, or they were drowned or things like that. And men used to say that about women, that they just didn't like or they wanted to get rid of, or for whatever reason. And I think that's actually kind of funny how these TV shows were just, they depict women as those, even though they're powerful beings, honestly, but now they're being controlled by men, when before they were something that were feared by men. And let's see, you can go to the next slide. So something that was said in her essay kind of caught my attention, which was the tales of housewifely desperation are still just as endlessly produced, endlessly popular, and contemptuously dismissed today. Mind you, this essay, or at least this book, was put together in 2017. So there was plenty of films before, and this woman has obviously been a lot older than me, so she's probably seen a lot of more films than I have. But I think there's a lot of films that still portray some of those aspects, but they also have a little bit difference, and we see a little bit of difference. One of the movies I want to talk about is The Devil Wears Prada, which both leads of that film were women, and one of the women was even in a higher position, seeing as they were in charge of the whole company, or at least the whole magazine. But it's still kind of like because it's, one, she's in charge of a magazine that is for women, and then two, it's pretty much just about fashion and runways and things that women are more interested than men. But I still think it's very different, just because it's about a woman trying to make it in a man's world, because technically, if you think about it, it's still business. Another movie that I want to talk about is called Penelope, and it's actually come to something that's, I don't know, I think it's pretty funny to me, especially with this topic, just because we're talking about traditional marriages and how women were basically taught to feel that their goal in life was to get married. Whereas Penelope, because she had obviously her nose looked like a pig, um, her mother was trying to push her to get married. She set up all these things, these meetings with men and different times of the day, like almost all day. And they would talk to Penelope through this and the communications, but as soon as they seen her face, they don't want to be with her anymore. But her mother was the one that was pushing those on her. And Penelope didn't want anything to do with that. She just wanted to fall in love with herself and not someone else. Which I think is I mean, it's kind of like the two lives that we're fighting today is the traditional marriage versus, or at least the traditional woman back then compared to the women we see now and the women that we want to be now. Another movie that I want to talk about is The Proposal. And in this movie is where there's a woman and a man lead, of course, but the woman is actually in a higher position than the man is actually considered her assistant. And actually it's the woman who offers the proposal and not the man. But of course it's under a very funny circumstance where it's the only way she can get out of being deported is by getting married. So I just think that, I don't know, these films were all like 2000, early 2000s, like 2006, 2007, 2008. I think The Proposal was 2011 maybe. Um, but I feel like there's a lot of other films that came out like that were more just based off the women, which were like The Heat, which has Melissa McCarthy and Sandra Bullock, and it's just Sandra Bullock's FBI agent and Melissa McCarthy is just a street cop, but it's just about those women and pretty much family at that point. And then there's also like Salt, which is an action movie, which has Angelina Jolie in it. And it's not really, those movies aren't really like relationship or romantic based, but they're women in leads, they're women in action. And I think that's something that we see a lot more of now that women back then in the 1960s and 1970s didn't really get to see. So I think that's an improvement, but I still think there needs to be more changes done into the thoughts being said.
Okay, so I think one of the main topics that she mentioned were gender roles, because it was basically what she was saying that men are, well, basically how it is all the time, how everybody thinks about it is how men are the breadwinners, how they're sort of the leader, and they're taught to be masculine, to be superior, and women are, they have to tend to the household and they have to tend to the children and the husband, but at the same time they need to be feminine, and they're the ones that are like, if the marriage isn't working, it's because they're not trying hard enough. And that's kind of what she incorporated in there, that they basically have to conform to their husband's needs. And she was even mentioning it in, like I said before, in her own parents' marriage, where she said she stated that it was better, it was different, but even for her, like, it was still the woman in the house and the men working to earn the money for them. Next slide, please.
Sorry, it's because my internet's unstable, so it keeps cutting off.
Okay, and then this is another interesting topic too that she mentioned, and it's basically just marriage. And one of the quotes I got was, traditional marriage, that is the single income, family wage, upper middle class model that became dominant in the 19th century to reinforce the existing global patriarchal power structure. So basically, like breaking it down, it kind of means that the men provide for the family while the women take care of the household. And even just the word family wage is in parentheses because it doesn't really, it's more the man provides his salary and the woman provides hers. So it's not really the family wage, but it's like his wage is the money, and then her payment to the family is basically having to clean and having to take care of their children in the house. And another quote is, it's about how mass media helps perpetuate this power structure by forever spinning fairy tales about marriage that on closer inspection are revealed to be horror stories. So for this, I also wanted to touch back to previous slides. So it could be like Stepford Wives, because it's basically marriage is thought of being this thing where two people are supposed to be equals and everything is for both, and nothing is nothing is more for one than the other. But an example of Stepford Wives is sort of a more not like an actual real example, but it could be taken as reality because the wives are controlled and they forget who they are. And this is what she even mentioned in the book, where women, once they get married, it's sort of like it's all about the men and it's all about their children, and they sort of lose themselves in it. And then the feminine mystique, which is also mentioned, whereas women lose themselves and they want to devote themselves to the household. So that's basically what they say there, that it's more women want to do it, but want is obviously in parentheses because sometimes it's more they are forced to do it based on what society says they have to do. And she mentions too that her parents have, obviously it's a different marriage than their grandparents. It's a little bit more modern, a little bit more, not so much women in their position, but even she says that she wouldn't want a marriage like that, when she gets married, she wants it to be more about love instead of it being just based on roles. So this is basically just the wrap up of the whole presentation. So it's just a little summary of each slide. But yeah, that's basically the end.